Our first reading is a reading from the second book of Kings. One day, Elisha came to Shunem, where there was a woman of influence who urged him to dine with her. Afterward, whenever he passed by, he used to stop there to dine. So she said to her husband, "I know that he is a holy man of God, since he visits us often. Let us arrange a little room on the roof and furnish it for him with a bed, table, chair, and lamp, so that when he comes to us, he can stay there." Sometime later, Elisha arrived and stayed in the room overnight. Later, Elisha said, "Can something be done for her?" "Yes," Gehazi answered. "She has no child, and her husband is getting on in years." "Call her," said Elisha. When she had been called and stood at the door, Elisha promised, "This time next year, you will be holding a child in your arms." The word of the Lord.
This morning's psalm response: forever I will sing the goodness of the Lord. Forever I will sing the goodness of the Lord. The favors of the Lord I will sing forever. Through all generations my mouth shall proclaim your faithfulness. For I have said, my kindness is established forever. In heaven you have confirmed your faithfulness. Forever I will sing the goodness of the Lord. Happy the people who know the joyful shout. In the light of your countenance, O Lord, they walk. At your name they rejoice all the day, and through your justice they are exalted. Forever I will sing the goodness of the Lord. For you are the splendor of their strength, and by your favor our horn is exalted. To the Lord belongs our shield, and to the Holy One of Israel, our ruler. Forever I will sing the goodness of the Lord.
A reading from the letter of Paul to the Romans. Are you not aware that we who were baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death? Through baptism into his death, we were buried with him, so that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of God, we too might live a new life. If we have died with Christ, we believe that we are also to live with him. We know that Christ, once raised from the dead, will never die again. Death has no more power over him. His death was death to sin once for all. His life is life for God. In the same way, you must consider yourselves dead to sin, but alive for God in Jesus Christ. The word of the Lord.
The Lord be with you. Thank you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Glory to you, O Lord. Jesus said to his apostles, "Whoever loves father and mother and son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Those who will not take up their cross and come after me are not worthy of me. Those who seek only themselves bring themselves to ruin, whereas those who bring themselves to naught for me discover who they are. Whoever welcomes you welcomes me. Whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Whoever welcomes a prophet because the person bears the name of prophet receives a prophet's reward. Anyone who welcomes a holy man or woman because they are known to be holy receives a holy person's reward. And I promise you that whoever gives a cup of cold water to any of these lowly ones because they are disciples will not want for their reward." The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord. Last weekend, I got to attend my niece's graduation, And at the graduation, one of the alumni gave the commencement speech. In it, he told them not to be afraid to fail. In fact, that failure would be part of their journey. He said, don't allow failure to keep you from trying, from taking risks to make the world better. He didn't want them to underestimate the expectations of bringing their leadership to the world. And in the gospel today, Jesus addresses his disciples and apostles, giving his own commencement speech, stating what it will take for them to go out and be his hands, his feet, his heart, his mouth in the world as they are being sent out. The word apostle comes from the Greek word apostolos, which means messenger or delegate. Jesus poses a very serious choice and challenge to them today, and perhaps to us. They had chosen to follow him in his love journey and the ministry of welcoming those on the margins of society, carrying the message and giving them the experience wherever they went that they are accepted, that the people they encountered are valued by God, regardless of their past, their gender, their sexuality, their race, their religion, their age, or their struggle. He welcomes children and tax collectors and prostitutes and fishermen and lepers and eunuchs and people with disabilities and religious leaders and teachers and lawyers and rich young rulers and women and sick people and folks struggling with demonic possession. Nobody was left off of Jesus's list. But you know, that can be a problem when you put everybody on your list. An elite, religiously conservative society that Jesus existed in saw most of these people as sinners, undeserving of God's grace, deserving instead of God's judgment, limitation, and punishment for the lives that they were leading. So if you were going to follow Jesus in creating room for those so-called sinners on the margins, trying to break into the center, but in fact being welcomed into the center, then Jesus needed to confront his disciples, his messengers, with a choice to either listen to those in their family that they love and the messages that they would be taking, messages from mothers and fathers and sons and daughters who may question whether there's room for everybody that Jesus wants to include, or were they going to listen to, trust, and follow Jesus' example of creating a place for everybody? For the disciples and apostles, it meant putting themselves at risk, really, to follow Jesus in this gospel of love and grace that makes room for everybody. And so he knows that following his radical message of the gospel of grace and inclusion is not for the weak. So he has the strongest talk with them in this gospel as he prepares to turn the reins over to them. Jesus knows that pressure that the apostles are under within their families, not very different from our own, right? They came from families with different political views and different religious views and different social views and different interpretations of law and practices based on their lived experiences or anxieties. Can't you just hear them? What am I going to tell my mother? Oh my gosh, Uncle Jack, Aunt Mary, where am I going to sleep tonight? Oh, this is going to be the last holiday dinner that I'll get invited to. Lord, Grandma. Right? And so the problem is that the message of social and religious exclusion and struggles can run deep in families. Amen? Those that we love, that we often trust. So Jesus starts right there. Whoever loves mother and father more than me, he says, is not worthy of me. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. On the surface, it looks like he's challenging our levels of love for family, but he's not. He wants us to love our families and love them real good. He's challenging the way that we factor that love as a gauge for whether to follow the message of unconditional love and acceptance for all, or put our trust in the messages and the voices of fear and exclusion and injustice that we often can hear from those closest to us. If we're going to follow Jesus in the gospel of love and grace in the world, then we have to cut ties with that messaging. We have to stop those tapes from playing. And so Jesus puts his apostles on the spot to settle the juggling of those messages that often play in our heads that uphold division, exclusion, and injustice in the world. I remember in 1998 when Father Jim was removed for creating more justice and an inclusive church for women and LGBTQ plus members and all those who desired communion with Jesus. I was distraught. And I remember calling one of my godmothers who I loved and I respected, and I had learned so much of faith from her. And I went looking for consolation and support. But what I got when I shared what was happening to us was she simply said, "Good, now maybe you can finally do the will of God." And I can't say enough how those words really pricked my heart, because I knew that what Father Jim and the staff were doing at Corpus was the will of God. It was in that moment that I realized that she and I had really never fully seen eye to eye on who Jesus was and what the will of God looked like. I simply assumed it. And for me, it was welcoming all to the table, choosing a feast. But theologically, for her, it was calling for a fast, fasting from those who should be at the table of God, instead of feasting with those who needed to be, who needed to feel God's love and God's welcome and God's acceptance. And while she didn't say it, I knew that I had to decide who I loved more, my godmother who taught me how to prepare my first sermon, or Jesus who was teaching me how to live my first sermon. So I chose Jesus. But you see, I wasn't the only one at the crossroads during that time. Many of you had to go home and tell mothers and fathers and grandparents and aunts and uncles and sons and daughters that you were either with us at Corpus standing with the gospel of inclusion or not. And you had to do it knowing that it would come with grave consequences. Some family members were disowned, others were ostracized. Others were left to carry perpetual shame for being part of such a renegade church that defied its bishop and the Church of Rome to include people on the margins by giving them a place in the center of church and spiritual life. It was one of the bravest moments that I witnessed in my life as people in this community stood up and chose the gospel of grace and the gospel of inclusion over the gospel of religious law and exclusion. This week, the Supreme Court struck a blow to the LGBTQ plus community, communities of color, and the incarcerated community. Conservative judges voted to uphold discrimination of services based on sexual orientation if you claim a religious objection. They voted to remove race as a consideration for college admission as a slap to efforts of diversity and to get to racial justice. They ruled that a person in federal prison for conduct that is no longer a crime cannot even ask a federal court to review their case if they challenge their conviction earlier, placing a stopgap to their pursuit of justice for wrongful conviction or relief. In all three cases, the theme is to create exclusionary barriers to those on the margins of our society, who Jesus committed to centering and providing a seat at the table of inclusion. So what would Jesus do? What would Jesus say? He would say that the courts were wrong and our work is not finished. And it's not the first time that the courts were wrong. Those same courts gave us the Dred Scott decision that said Black people had no rights for which white people were bound to respect. And they're wrong now. We must end the use of religion to discriminate and not encourage it. We must continue to correct our history of racial discrimination by increasing the need for diversity, not limit it, in student admissions, in books, in images, and religious settings and workplaces. We must continue to fight for justice for those incarcerated wrongly and stop muting the voice of justice and relief. Using religious discrimination and objections have caused much harm in our world. It's allowed religious affiliated schools to fire women who became pregnant out of wedlock. It's allowed business owners to claim the right to refuse to provide insurance coverage for contraception for employees. It's allowed graduate students training to be social workers to claim it in refusal to counsel gay couples. We must never allow the message of exclusion to be louder and more prominent than the message of inclusion and generosity that we as people of faith are called to bring. We have a responsibility to stand up and choose radical love and the actions of inclusion and love in every age and in every moment, especially in this one. Patrick Dwyer is one of our parishioners, and he was a perfect example this week for me. Instead of sulking about the Supreme Court decision against the LGBTQ+ community, he decided to put his faith in action and give an extra donation, he said, to the Black Community Focus Fund. And when he told me that, I thought, Patrick, that's a great idea. So I started thinking about who could I be more kind and generous to? And so I cash-apped a mother who I knew that was struggling. Maybe you want to do that this week as well. Maybe be extra generous this week at church or in your community as a response to this national blow of injustice in our world. We can change the ripple. Kindness, generosity, and openness has always been Jesus' remedy. So Jesus offers a sharp warning to the disciples, and that is, whoever loves the messaging of father and mother and sons and daughters more than me and my message is not worthy of me. Whoever doesn't take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. You see, the message we receive and carry in our spaces matter. He sat down, Jesus, with anyone who wanted to be present. And at times, he pursued people who were surprised at his invitation to be included. In the sharing of a meal, those he encountered received consideration and compassion and love instead of condemnation. They received merciful acquittals instead of guilty verdicts. They received amazing grace instead of universal disgrace. Those who were being called to follow him were to do so by bringing grace and a new chance of life for others. You see, the word worthy is not a personal worthiness. The word worthy here means balancing the scales. What Jesus is saying very plainly is that I am sending you forth to balance the scales, to do what you must, to be willing to walk in my message of love and grace and inclusion without exception. So in their hearts, that challenge was to be willing, as the recovery community knows, to change people, places, and things. And when we do it, we know that it's going to come both at a cost and a blessing. He goes on to say, whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. You see, he knows that if we simply seek to preserve our life in this world, we'll find ourselves only doing what is safe and lose the very heart of life by maintaining the status quo. But when we lose our lives and take risks for Jesus' sake, we find the heart of life. When we take risks for Jesus, it's to follow that message of radical love, and that love includes a place for everybody. You may remember the story of a woman who was excommunicated and forbidden to enter the church for challenging its discriminatory practices. Well, she was very upset by it, and she took her woes to God, and she said, Lord, in prayer, they won't let me in, Lord, because they say that I'm a sinner. And God said to her, what are you complaining about? They won't let me in either. Sometimes we have to follow God in, and sometimes we have to follow God out. We will never be able to right-size our world with old messages of discrimination and fear and anxiety and injustice and violence. Jesus, throughout his ministry, invites us to live in his love, Not our mother and father's love that may fall short sometime, not our siblings' love that may struggle at times, but his love, a love that never fails us, a love that never leaves us out, a love that heals, a love that helps, a love that lifts. And that is why he asks us to live in it and take risks for that kind of love. When we live in God's love, there is great mystery, a great mystery of receiving that happens. Jesus lists all of the wonderful blessings that will be awaiting the community that these disciples and these apostles are sent to. He speaks to them about the hospitality that they will find, the blessings of a prophet's reward, a holy woman and a holy man's reward that they will receive. They'll even receive a blessing for just giving a cup of water to these little ones. Jesus reminds them that blessing is always lurking in the communities and places for which we are sent. Last week, I took a team out into 14605 community to tell people about the Guaranteed Basic Income Pilot Program opportunity. And as we knocked on doors, we met so many wonderful people who were thrilled to hear about the program and learn how to apply. At one point, we finished our side streets and we were heading towards North Clinton Avenue, at which point one of the people in the group said, "Uh-oh, we're now going into dangerous territory." In some ways, she was right. Not that the people were dangerous, but that these were the people most at risk, and also the ones who needed the message that we were bringing the most, that could alter their lives. And so we came upon a group of men playing street dice. And I interrupted them with a strategy that I knew they would respond to. We presented the program to these group of young men, and they ended up giving us their full attention and their full gratitude. They told us that if they get picked for this program, it would change their lives. And so this is what Jesus knew when he instructed his apostles and disciples to walk worthy of him, to love his love more than anything or anyone else. Friends, it looks pretty dark right now in our world, but we are Jesus' disciples, and we are not afraid of the darkness. We are light bringers. We are being called in this moment to take that radical, unconditional love of Jesus and use it to change the world. And we will not be deterred by the Supreme Court. We will not be deterred by exclusive religious practices, nor social norms that are slow to create a seat at the table for all. Zachary Levi, in his book, Radical Love, writes this: ultimately, society cannot function if we're not using our gifts for the good of the whole. There's a reason we are all different in these different hues of this spectrum. We all are part of the same light, but we each serve a different purpose. We're all interconnected and linked to each other. We balance each other. We need each other. I believe God has created all of us to be conduits of love, conduits of life, conduits of light. So friends, I think we have been given great marching orders with these apostles and disciples, and there is certainly no better time to get started than right now.
Here I am to bow down. Here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. Light of the world, you stepped down into darkness, opened my eyes, let me see beauty that made this heart adore you, hope of a life spent with you. Here I am to work, here I am to bow down. Here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. And I'll never know how much it costs to see my sins upon the cross. I'll never know how much it costs to see my sins upon the cross. I'll never know how much it costs to see my sins upon the cross. So here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether